Hey everybody, good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on your time zone, where you're located right now. This is Brendan Vanis. I'm the Senior Developer Relations Engineer for PlayFab. With me, I've got Tom Robbins. He's our Director of Marketing, and he'll be talking to you today about live game operations, specifically about user acquisition. Tom?
Thank you, Brendan. I appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone for joining today. It's kind of a special day. We've been working pretty hard behind the scenes to roll out what we're calling the Live Game Ops Academy. And this is the first class of what we hope is many. And I appreciate we've gotten some great feedback from the community. And I know a lot of people here are attending to kind of learn about it. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. So let's hop into it. I don't think anyone's going to argue that, in the old days, several years ago, you built a game and then we went ahead and launched it. We took the master, we sent it off. Players also were buying the games. They would spend their $50. They would wait for us to build another release, and then we would launch it again. It was a very different model, and traditionally this had worked well, but the problem is today, in order to be successful, you really need to think about not only the idea of building the game, but what you're going to do in launch and how you're going to launch the game and all the pieces that go with that. And that includes everything from customer service to how you're going to attain new users, kind of the business around building your game and launching it and what happens afterwards. We at PlayFab have been talking to a lot of developers over the last couple of years, and it really became clear that this was such a huge area of interest, and there aren't a lot of people out there who've done it successfully, and people want to learn about that. So part of what we're doing in the Live Game Ops Academy is starting to build out that set of educational material and muscle that people can do or people can use in order to learn about these live game techniques. What I think is interesting about it is we've got currently three webinars and basically three classes that we've set up at this point to get people going. And this being the first one, which is around user acquisition. We do have two more scheduled, one on user engagement and one on monetization, and we are going to be adding more. So we're asking for a couple of things. One is, please go ahead and sign up for the other two as well, and those people who attend all three classes will receive the PlayFab Live Game Ops 101 certificate, which we think really is the beginnings of helping the industry create a baseline around what matters and what education is important and how you think about the live gaming world and all the live gaming pieces that are in it. The other is we're going to continue to build this out. So the second big ask is please let us know what kind of information that you think needs to be brought up, as well as if you're out there and you say, hey, I know about this or that topic, we would absolutely love to have you join the Live Game Ops Academy staff and the faculty and really kind of help us start to think about how we're going to grow and educate the market around these kind of core concepts. So what we did with today's webinar is we're starting with this idea of user acquisition. And it's funny because I think user acquisition is probably a huge challenge that faces anybody. Before coming into gaming, I was in kind of traditional marketing, and anytime you launched an application, user acquisition was a huge problem. How do I get new people to use it? How do I grow the base? How do I think about it? All of those things. And now with games, it becomes even harder, because if you look at the number of games released every day or every week on like the app stores, it's steadily increasing it. When you think about some of the statistics, most industry average that I've read says it's about $2 to $3 per acquisition of a new customer or new user. If you think about that, that's actually a lot of money to really invest, especially as if you're looking at things like free-to-play and the rest. So if you kind of extrapolate that out, if you offer a free iPhone app, you need roughly about 70,000 downloads per day to get into kind of the top 10. And that's just a rough number, but if you think about that, that's kind of very scary, you know, in order to think about how you're going to get that many new users onto your game as you start building it out. And then if you're doing kind of a paid app, it's just about 4,000 that you need, which, you know, while that doesn't seem a huge number, you know, certainly it is. So these are kind of the huge things that face us as we think about how we're going to acquire our new players and our new users out there. So let's hop into kind of ways that we can think about that. I always recommend considering the lifetime value of a player as kind of the starting point. This is probably the single most important metric for understanding your customers. It's going to help you make kind of key business decisions around things like your sales, your marketing, your product development, and even customer support. So, for example, if you think about it from terms of marketing, you know, how much should I spend to acquire a customer? You know, the industry says it's $2 to $3. Is that the right number for your game, or should it be lower, or should it be higher? You know, product. So obviously, as you roll out your product, your game, you want to figure out what's the best way to engage. And we've got some webinars out there that talk about player engagement, and then how you can help look at that and then figure out ways that you can grow that. You know, customer support. While we hate to lose customers, all of us don't want to lose game players. You really have to think about at certain times how much are you going to spend to service and maintain a customer. You know, if you think about, you know, the whales out there that are in your game, you're certainly going to spend more, but at some point there's a value that you really need to keep in mind. And then as you're thinking about customer acquisition, you know, it's like how much should you spend on trying to acquire, you know, as well as, you know, just pure working through ad networks or other areas. I kind of think about these as, you know, kind of three overlapping circles, and kind of the big thing that you want to work with is kind of the red area that you see here, which is the overlap. You know, obviously this is kind of going to give you the broadest canvas that you can as you kind of drive a lot of those things out. So it becomes incredibly important for you to think about kind of all of the ways that you can do that, but always start with the idea of lifetime value. And this is, I think, something that's incredibly important and something that you need to think about as you move forward. So let's hop kind of a layer less and really like look at where do our players come from. And, you know, whether, you know, if you're new to game-based marketing or if you come out of traditional marketing, there's some core concepts here that I think are incredibly important to understand. We have this idea of paid, which is where we're going to go ahead and buy or rent players, and we're going to use external publishers. And we'll talk more about each of these. So things like earned, where players are referred from non-paid, and I often think about these as organic, and then owned, which is players are referred from our internal or company-owned channels. So when we think about kind of owned media as an example, we're thinking about basically our sets of channels and broad controls. So things like our website, our mobile site, our blog, our Twitter, you know, our Facebook. We tend to focus a lot on owned media for building longer-term relationships. And I think about that as, well, maybe we have one of our game studios that's focused very heavily on the community, and part of what they're doing is they're creating that relationship between themselves and their community so that they can put a lot of games out there and get a lot of opinions back. The interesting part about this is when you think about owned media, you have to think through a couple of challenges. I mean, typically, people don't naturally just trust companies. They have to think it through. They have to make sure and kind of see a couple of examples of where you've done the right thing, where you've answered. And the other part with owned media is that it does take time to scale. So owned media is something that, you know, you can't just roll out and expect it to take off. When you think about things like earned media is really where the customer becomes the channel. This is probably the most important area of any marketing campaign. You can really become the most credible in this space. You really can get the most feedback. You're going to get people who are very interested in what you're doing. The downside of owned media is that it can be negative, and that kind of scares people, right? So what if people say things like, they don't like your game, or they don't like this, or, you know, they give kind of negative feedback. When you get into earned media, you really need to think through, you know, how you're going to respond to negative criticism. And this is something that a lot of people worry about. I mean, in talking to some of our game studios, we start to realize that it is a little scary, and you know, as a company, we worry about kind of this negative thing. But the reality is, you know, if you are good to your customers and you're honest and you're transparent, then earned media can really truly pay it off. And then last is paid media. And I kind of went backwards a little bit because what's interesting about paid media is that you're paying for it, right? It costs money. It costs hard dollars. And then what's interesting is as you kind of pay for this, you know, you're starting to do things like ad networks. You have to really calculate how many people you're getting in and what that value is. One of the big concerns, obviously, is that you can become part of the clutter. So as I play any game today, you know, there's areas where I could watch a video ad to get extra credit or get extra gold. And the reality is I may not always pay attention. I might hit start and I might walk away. And that's part of the clutter. And if you look at things like Facebook as well as Twitter, you know, you become part of the background noise, and it really means that you could be wasting money. And this creates this idea of declining possibilities, right? So the more money you put in, the more or the less response you get. So these are just some things to think about as far as your actual media goes and ways that you can acquire players. If we hop into things like paid acquisition, this is typically where you're going to integrate with ad networks. One of the key recommendations that we always give people is to avoid, is to look at network server side. This is going to avoid, obviously, the SDK bloat that's out there. If you're looking at paid acquisition, obviously things like attribution tracking is incredibly important. You want to integrate with services like Kachava or Tune. If you're not familiar with attribution tracking, we actually do have some great videos that present it. But really what I want you to think about in attribution tracking is really this idea that a player sees your ad, they click on the ad, and that you can then go ahead, have them install the game, and then you can attribute the actual ad to how many players that brought in. So you're actually paying the right channel. As well as you're being able to do with things like, you know, Swerve and Kachava, really looking at how a channel is paying off. So for example, you know, if you're investing heavily in the Facebook channel and you're not really seeing, you know, a value, why would you want to continue doing that? And then obviously within ads themselves, different ad sets pay off differently. You might find that you know, if you're in a specific genre, that videos may pay off better, or that, you know, specific screenshots or specific things may bring in more players. So it's about tuning on the attribution side, this idea of the best channel with the actual you know, best display ad. So is it a video? Is it a specific picture of your app or something along that side? The other is things like defining your success metrics, which should be pretty straightforward, right? I mean, you're gonna budget. What does success look like? How many players do you want to get in? One of the big things that I often see is people who define a budget and then they stick to that budget. The reality is agile marketing techniques today really define that you're changing your plan on, I hate to say it on an hourly basis, but it could be on a couple of days basis. So post-launch, you want to look at what channels are performing the best. So pre-launch, I can sit down and kind of figure out what I think will make sense. But once I start getting data in, I want to then go ahead and start adjusting and kind of driving the right things in. And then obviously this comes into things like optimizing your content and your channels, right? So if you're investing in things like Facebook and it's not paying off for Twitter, cut it. Don't spend the time on it. And typically what I worry about with people that I've worked with is that they'll develop their budget. They say, no, we're going to spend this much on Facebook or this much on Twitter or this much through this ad agency. And the reality is that they're not seeing the payoff, whereas what they should have done is looked at it earlier, cut it off, redirected either that budget, that time, or those resources over to another channel and kind of driven that across. And last is hiring an expert. I mean, clearly there's, lots of agencies. We've actually been talking to some who, happily are going to be posting on our blog here shortly, about their thoughts on how you can market effectively, so keep an eye on our blog for more information on that. All right, so let's go ahead and go on to our next slide there. So let's drive a little bit into different areas, like looking at each of the acquisition areas that we talked about. So kind of quickly, keys to some earned acquisition. Editorial support. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer as you think about being placed properly in the App Store or the Play Store. And all the data points to, you can get almost a 10x increase. And there's a bunch of ways of doing that, and we've actually got some great experts. I think that we're going to be looking to set up some additional webinars on that as we drive some of that forward. But some generic things to think about, right? You want to work with the platform teams, and our recommendation is always 2 months before. And you want to support the platform priority features, right? So what is it that they're trying to drive, as well as how can you better integrate with them to obviously help move their agenda forward as well. A couple of other things to think about is, social features. And to be honest with you, social features are an incredibly important and powerful way for people to think about. And it's kind of interesting when you think about the idea of earned or owned media. People spend a lot of time, and typically social media tends to fall in between those. So, they'll talk about it as owned media, but if you do Facebook right, or if you do, one of the other channels right, the social media channels, you can actually get an incredible amount of earned media out of that. And there's some good ways of thinking about that, right? So Facebook single sign-on is a great one, where you can really try to get email and get people to email and kind of let other people know what's out there. If you think about sharing all of that information on your social channel, it becomes incredibly powerful. So all the studies will say that generally people will respond a lot more favorably if their friend sends them a link than if you send them a link as an email or something else. And there's a couple of interesting kind of game loops or core loops that you can think through around this, right? You can aggregate all of your social media into a central center. There's things about thinking through a social currency. earn through friend actions, so you can do things like get special items or drive special items. I mean, there's kind of a lot of different things that you can do to kind of help move that forward. So some of the other things to think through are your social features, building out things like a custom multi-friend selector, and this kind of allows people to see who they've invited, what they're doing. You can also pre-populate lists. So one of the things you want to do is try to have people give you access to that information, but then you can use it to help them create kind of more relevant links that are there. I'm a big fan of things like social codes, so using things like SMS and email invites, which really kind of provide, outside of Facebook and that non-Facebook virality, which becomes really interesting and allows people to do a lot more than they could do kind of within Facebook. And then you'll also notice, and I'm seeing this in a lot of the more successful games, well, they'll say, well, can we invite friends from your contact list? So it is important to think through a couple of things, right? One is you want to get permission, which means you need to make sure that people are happy with your game and they're comfortable with what you're doing. Second is you want to ask them for permission in order to do that. And there's some great ideas around how to do this. Clearly, if you think about things like the peak end rule and some of the others, you want to ask people at a positive moment in the game, right? You don't want to ask someone after they've just spent 30 minutes on one level and they keep getting killed. Hey, is it okay if we invite your friends to the game, right? You want to think about a positive moment. They've just killed the boss, or they've just got a huge gold win, or they finished a level, and then asking them. And what that'll do is it'll obviously make them more interested in working with you, but also it'll give them the capability of being more positive as they do things like push it out on their social channels. So a couple of other things to keep in mind is keeping lightweight solutions, so things like being able to maintain save states, achievements, leaderboards, discoverability, Facebook likes. And it's interesting, there's a lot of power in a lot of these things, and they're not incredibly complex to integrate within your game. So it is something that we always recommend that you include as you move forward. I did want to spend a few minutes talking about App Store optimization, and we're going to set up with the Game Academy a couple more webinars because this is kind of a topic all on its own. But when you think about, App Store optimization, there's a couple of key techniques here, right? Obviously, things like Rate My App are an incredibly important thing. Ones that I would also recommend is asking for the rating at that moment of delight, right? And that's something that when you're looking at your core loop, you want to think about when's the right time to ask, right? Once again, don't ask me after I just got killed after trying something for 20 minutes. But getting that, Rate My App at the right time. The other is testing. And I can't kind of stress this enough as you should think about it. Just for example, if you think about your app icon, I always recommend people think about it in what I call the 10-foot rule. And the 10-foot rule says you can make your icon stand out from others even if you're 10 feet away. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, you want to make sure that you make your content element pop. It should be obvious what your app is about. I typically recommend a border so that you can kind of see what it makes it stands out. And then the other is testing. And I can't specify enough around this idea of testing. Try it out, see how it converts using A/B testing, or just seeing kind of what kind of feedback you're getting. But once you've tested and tested again, you really can continue to refine. The other is talking about screenshots. And this is something that I think a lot of people overlook. I spent some time looking at the App Store last night for some of the games And I have a 12-year-old son who spends a lot of time looking at the App Store trying to find games. And in asking him, I said, tell me what will drive you to select a game. Obviously the biggest one is because he heard his friends talk about it. The second is, as he looks at things like screenshots, he starts thinking about kind of how he would play it. He brought up what I thought was some really kind of great ideas, right? Do you need to add explanations? So if you look at your screenshot, will people understand intuitively what's there, or do you need to add an explanation in? The other is selecting a screenshot that helps tell the game story. He and I spent some time looking last night, and what I realized is that he was looking at some games and he would say, well, I don't know why this picture's here because it doesn't match for the shooter game. And that's the kind of thing that really doesn't highlight the best features within your game. So thinking through kind of how you're going to do that, and then once again thinking about how you're going to do things like test and kind of drive that stuff out. And then let's hop on to our next one. There we go. So things like PR and press outreach. I mean, clearly, you can spend some time really thinking about how you're going to do this, but PR and press outreach is incredibly important. The big thing within that is there's a couple of big things. One is making sure that you're credible, right? So there's some great resources that I'll talk about at the end where you can look at I think it's called the big list of game sites, which basically has the list of like specific genres and things that you can do. But when you're contacting a site, you want to be incredibly gracious with them. You also want to make sure that you're not contacting someone who wouldn't be interested, as well as making sure that you're giving them the relevant information. There's nothing worse than reaching out to a blogger or a website or a press person and say, I've got the world's greatest puzzle game, when clearly they only write about other genres or other areas. It is incredibly important to do a couple of things. One is understand what people are driving. So what is it that they're consistently writing about? Also, what matters to them, right? So I always recommend how you think about writing your email. You want to tailor it to each person you're sending to. And I usually recommend spending an hour or two looking at what the website that they write for is, what information, looking them up on social networks to see what they're interested in, trying to really understand what's out there. And the reality is you can't guarantee anything with earned media, and especially as you think about as you get publicity. But the reality is, if you do it right and you can get pickup in the right websites or get the right YouTubers to write about you, it's incredibly powerful because it's giving a personal endorsement around what you're doing. And all of the things that I've seen out there say over and over again that while you'll get a certain amount of people, it triples in people that'll activate or work with you if they hear from the right third party or from a friend as well. So a couple of other things about owned acquisition. Cross-promotion. Obviously, spending time thinking about cross-promotion becomes incredibly important. So surfacing your new game elements. Incentives to try out new games can be very effective. Things like prompts at loads of key moments. So I'm out of energy. Excuse me. I'm out of energy. Hey, did I want to watch a video, or did I want to try out another game while I'm waiting for my energy to reload? So this idea of cross-promotion becomes incredibly important in order to grow your game. And the reality is, especially in the live games, we've been talking to a lot of developers who've had games out, and it's the natural evolution, right? The game goes out, it becomes popular, you put new content, but eventually it might be time to shut the game down, or you're just not seeing, you know, the kind of the kind of revenue and monetization that you need to. Being able to not just shut the game down, but being able to transition those players into either your new game or someone else's is a huge value. Clearly, the players that are there the longest and that have been playing it are going to be very interested in what you're doing next, or kind of integrating in with you so that they can understand it. And then let's go ahead and hop on here. Some other things to think about with owned acquisition. Obviously, the web is incredibly important. Spend a lot of time looking at SEO. I know this is kind of one topic that we've really targeted in on for the Games Academy as a way of understanding better ways that you can drive organic discovery. How do you build landing pages? And this is all about creating kind of the right calls to action. You know, trailers are incredibly important, and I think a lot of people, you know, don't really spend the time on it. I found some great industry standard that says about 6% of the people who watch in-game videos are going to click through the game, which is not bad. I mean, it's not incredibly good, but almost 20% will click through and download if their friends post it, right? So give me the right trailer, give me the ability as a player to put it on my, you know, Facebook wall or some other, and then be able to allow my friends to do it. That's an example of being able to kind of drive that out and make it incredibly easy for people, you know, to kind of download your game. Things like social channels. I think I've talked a lot about kind of the social channel aspect. You know, obviously things like social channels are great. One of the other things that I didn't talk about is this idea of reacquiring lapsed users. So a lot of times players, I mean, I have games that I played before and then I don't play them as much, but I noticed that my friends are playing them and it's like, hey, maybe I should open it back up. So these are some of the things that you can think about. So as you think about kind of this lifetime value concept we talked about initially, it is incredibly important for people to really look at, if someone goes lapsed, how can I reacquire them and how can I get them back in the game? And then let's move on here. Some other acquisition concerns, and I think this is something that most people know, but I did want to spend a few minutes on it, is just talking about over-the-air download limits. You know, it's pretty common that if it's over 50 megabytes for Android or 100 megabytes for Apple, that's going to reduce your install funnel by 50%. So what you want to think about is how can you get that game down, post-launch installers, so that you can download new content to get people there. Because, you know, if you think about it, you've got not only the friction of getting me to understand that I'm interested in this game, getting me aware, then getting me interested, then getting me to download it. And then if I've got this huge download and it takes forever, then I'm just going to cancel it. And it's like, okay, you've done all of that work, and that you don't really, you know, get the full benefit. So, like I said, use things like post-launch installers and other platforms so that you can download assets in the background, which is becoming incredibly easier today with today's tech than it's ever been before. So a couple of other acquisition concerns is obviously localization. And I know people spend a lot of time kind of looking at localization and thinking about it, but you know, one of the things you can think about is that regional performance in games that I've seen has been increased by 100% plus. And it's kind of interesting too, because often what I've found is post-launch doing localization can be more expensive, because you have to not only localize the content, but then you realize that there are different things you might have to do with your game. And it might also be less effective because you may not get kind of the boom that you have. And then obviously things like mobile revenue. I mean, obviously the U.S. is not the only place in the world, and it is something that you want to think about. You can see as you're building this out that you not only want to think about your standard kind of your game, but also your marketing communication. So if you're going to do things like go to social channels or go into other areas or provide forums or kind of integrate things, then it becomes incredibly important that you have localized across those areas as well. All right, so hopefully you guys kind of have seen some great things around what we're focusing on around the Live Game Ops Academy. Today was just obviously a kickoff. Where we're really looking at ramping it up. I did want to call attention to two other resources that we're making available. One is our Live Game Operations ebook, which really talks about user acquisition, user engagement, and monetization that are kind of things that we think are incredibly important, and you can go download that today. I have a bit.ly link that's there. The other is that we're rolling out our Live Game Operations Resource Center, and what the Resource Center is basically a collection of activities, a collection of resources that we want to provide out to the community. And these are not only resources that we do, but also other resources. We've been working with a few other folks across the community around what kind of great free-to-play spreadsheets they might have, or different activities. So please take a look at that. If you have additional resources that you might be interested in adding, feel free to let us know. We're trying to make this community-based so that we're not actually, it's not just PlayFab, because the reality is this is such a huge topic that we want to make it that much more important for people. So kind of closing it out. If you have questions, feel free to send them in. We definitely want to make sure we get things answered. I want to make sure that everyone's aware that we have two other webinars scheduled. Our next one being October 13th, where we're going to drill into user engagement, and then October 20th, where we're going to drill into monetization. Attend all three sessions, and you can receive the PlayFab Live Game Ops 101 certificate by email. If you're not able to provide or attend all three sessions, we are working with some community folks, and we are going to create kind of a little test that once you can watch the materials and work with it. So we want to make sure that we're providing this information, and helping people kind of learn what's there. So
great. Yeah, great. Okay, just wanted to step in. Thanks, Tom. We do have a couple of questions, looks like, coming in. I think the first one is thinking about user acquisition overall and looking at the way that games are being produced these days. What are your thoughts on how Kickstarter, for example, fits into an overall acquisition strategy, and how far ahead of your Kickstarter campaign should you really be looking at engaging with your community to make sure you're really getting as much uptick as possible?
I think that's a great question. So I think Kickstarter has changed tremendously how we get games built today, right? We have some customers, some studios that we work with at PlayFab who've gone through successful Kickstarters, and what we've seen is it gives them the ability to build out their game as well as finalize it. What I usually recommend is, and it depends on your studio type and your philosophy. I know the more successful studios that I've seen are really out there talking to their community early and often. So they'll do a couple of things. They might tell their community that they're thinking about building a specific game even before they've gone to Kickstarter. I mean, the reality is once you've got something up on Kickstarter, it's a little late to start addressing your community. So I tend to vote for the as early as possible and often, and also engaging your community, because from what I've seen, the most successful Kickstarter campaigns are those that get community support, that have kind of the viral nature of the genre of whatever game you're building as a way of driving that through. And I know, Brendan, you have some experience with Kickstarter. Do you have anything to add into that?
No, I think that's that's largely the advice that I would give. One way to think about Kickstarter is you're looking to acquire your users ahead of your Kickstarter campaign. Don't think of it as launch a Kickstarter and then that's what drives people to the game, because that is actually how a number of Kickstarters have failed in the past. You've got to build up anticipation ahead of the Kickstarter campaign itself, so that when it kicks off, you'll be able to see a lot of people come on. I think if you guys are, you've been in the industry for a while, you may have seen one of the most recent ones that had a 1 hour clean blow straight through their target, and that was the BattleTech game that Harebrained Schemes is working on. And I haven't even checked today. I know that my wife is very interested in that Kickstarter and has contributed, so I need to actually check to see how they're doing. But yeah, that's a great one there. And then once you've got users engaged in your Kickstarter, another thing to think about acquisition is not just you've acquired the users, even though your game's not out yet at that point. So how do you maintain your user community? What sorts of events and things do you want to drive, which are ways that you keep your community engaged, ways you get your community to interact with you and with each other, so that they maintain that same level of excitement all the way through to the launch of your game and beyond.
Great.
Okay. So looking back, we've got a couple more questions coming in. One of which is, we have one on localization, and the question is whether or not there are ways to do localization automatically, effectively taking strings of text and automatically generating the translated text.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So I know that there are several. So before going into the games industry, I was in the CMS, or the content management system industry. And there are third parties that are out there that you can basically send them your resource strings. I think translate.com is one, and I'm sure there are others that you can do it automatically. So you take your existing text, you send it to them, and then it comes back. I don't think you can, you're obviously going to localize it once the game is released. But if you don't speak French, or if you don't speak, German, or whatever you're trying to localize, you can use those third-party services. And having used them, I've never used them on the game industry side, but having used them on the CMS side, I've had some great success. And I know translate.com is one that I used probably been about 3-4 years ago, and I didn't have any issues getting it back in French, as an example of that.
Great. Okay. Moving on to the next question. How can Google Analytics be useful for user acquisition?
Wow, Google Analytics, that's like a whole topic in itself. So Google Analytics can be incredibly powerful for user acquisition across a couple of different areas. One is it's going to give you insights into how many, just kind of pure numbers, right? How many people are hitting your site, how many people are staying on a page, what your bounce rate looks like, and it's kind of an interesting problem, right? Because do you want people, let's just take a simple example of I've announced maybe my game, I've got a forum site up, and I'm trying to understand what people are doing. I can look at things like Google Analytics to see, are people coming in, are they hitting that page where I announced my specific game and then leaving, so that's a bounce rate problem, or are they coming from the forums, right, which also means that my existing customers are really interested in this, and it's something that I can help learn. Google Analytics also has the ability to do things like campaigns. So just to be clear, right, this is not a replacement for things like the Kachavas of the world and that kind of stuff, but you can do campaigns and then be able to see the results of those campaigns. So if you want to do placements or if you want to do content placements, you can do that as well. And then, of course, you know, and it's interesting. I think Google Analytics has been fantastic for a lot of the bulk data. I'm honestly not a fan of Google AdWords anymore. You know, I tend to find that it's incredibly expensive. I don't see the return for a lot of other things, so I'm not a huge fan of that. But if you're finding that Google AdWords does work well, then, you know, definitely it gives you more insight into what's there. So good. All right. So why don't we, if we have time for one other question?
At the moment, we don't see. Oh wait, we've got. Oh, okay. We're getting some things coming through from folks.
All right.
Great. So it looks like we've answered most of the questions. If anybody else has any remaining, we'll be here for. Oh wait, we do indeed have another. If your game were unfortunate enough to somehow become saturated with negative feedback from users, is there an effective way to combat that?
Wow, that's a great question. So, all right, I'm gonna give you the hard answer, which is that all brands in the world have negative feedback and are tainted, right? There's no brand out there that says, you know, everything smells like roses. When you get saturated with bad feedback, there's a couple of things you have to do. One is take a step back and see what the negative feedback is, right? Are people looking at poor gameplay, or are they looking at, you know, they don't like your policies or something like that? So what I would do is I would probably look at the causes. So I'd start by listing out what the themes are that I'm seeing, and then try to answer that. You know, and I wouldn't argue with my players. I would, you know, simply say, you know, gee, they're unhappy about this thing. What can we do to make it better? And then be as transparent as you can. I come from the world of, I believe if I'm transparent with my players or people that we're talking to, and I'm honest and genuine, that people will respect that. And honest and genuine doesn't always mean that, you know, if you want something, I'm going to give it to you. But it also means that I'm going to kind of be honest and as honest with you as I can. So, yeah, I think that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the case, that if your players feel that they're working with you, that you're working with them rather than just trying to push them in a certain direction, that's inevitably going to make you more successful.
Yeah, great.
One more question. It's more of a technical one, so I'll grab this one.
Sure.
The question is on, does PlayFab support iOS native? And short answer, yes, we absolutely do. If you're a Unity developer, we have a Unity plugin, which is pretty much a drop in and go for iOS. If you're on other platforms, we have a number of different SDKs, Cocos 2DX, for example, that you can use to get started using PlayFab. If there's something specific you're looking for developing, please, you know, feel free to let us know through our forums, or contact us at devrel, that's DEVREL, at playfab.com, and let us know. And we'll get you the info that you need to be able to get started using it.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us on our inaugural Live Game Ops Academy. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you'll sign up for the others. And as I said, we would love to get additional feedback. You can either use DEVREL at playfab.com or webinars at playfab.com, or send me an email directly. I'm Thomas, THOMAS, at playfab.com. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you on October 13th for our user engagement. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.